What's up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of Processing Blue, where, yes, we process blue for you. I'm Alex Zietlow. I am joined by Mike Kaye, and we cover the Carolina Panthers for the Charlotte Observer. You might be thinking, what in the world do these guys have to talk about? It's in the middle of February. The NFL Scouting Combine is a couple weeks away. Free agency is in March. The draft is far away in April. And yet somehow, I promise you, we will entertain you for the next 30 to 40 minutes. We got a great show for you today. We will talk a lot of things Panthers football. But first, Mike, the most massive news of all. J.J. Jansen's back.
America's long snapper is going to play an 18th season. Unprecedented in Carolina.
Really?
Yeah, he signs a one-year deal for the sixth consecutive offseason. They got that done pretty quickly. This is, I don't want to say it was a foregone conclusion, but if I were a betting man, it would have been the best bet you could make of the 18 unrestricted free agents that were set to test the market. Jansen's not just a consistent long snapper who, at least since I've been here, he's never had a bad snap, but he's also a friend of the podcast, and he is now one of the newest members of the Indoor Football League's commentating crew. He's got a show on SiriusXM. Like, he is making moves. He also has an ownership stake in 3 separate minor league hockey teams. He's starting Upshot, a women's basketball league. Like, the man just, he's got a lot to do. And one of those things is snapping balls between his legs for at least the next, 10 months in Carolina.
Yeah. He's certainly a renaissance man, and we love talking about him. But truly, he is an important part, at least of that specialist group, because, in order for the Panthers punt unit to be so good, which they were really good at the end of last year, the snap has to be really good. In order for Ryan Fitzgerald to flourish as a rookie kicker, the snaps and the holds need to be good as well. So congrats to JJ on getting that done. Let's move on to someone who the Panthers might be interested in bringing in, not just bringing back, but bringing in. Bradley Chubb. Chubb, of course, spent the last 3 seasons in Miami. The Dolphins announced that they will release the 29-year-old pass rusher to save them some money against his salary cap. He is set to be released at the start of the new league year. And Mike, this is so interesting because whenever big names gets out there on Twitter or social media or whatever that these big names are going to be free agents, you see a lot of fan bases just kind of quote tweet and get really excited and say, "Hey, Dan Morgan, bring him in here, get him in here." And normally when I see that, I say, okay, this is a really fun moment. Like we saw it with Jair Alexander last year as well as a cornerback. Anyway, it's an interesting moment, but oftentimes I'm like, okay, that's relatively unrealistic. I also thought that with the Milton Williams thing last year, although apparently the Panthers were closer to making that deal than I initially thought they would be. But when I look at the Bradley Chubb of this, does this kind of make sense to you? There are several elements of this that seem like, hey, he could actually do some things in Carolina.
Yeah, I think he's a guy who's kind of interesting just because of his background. Obviously, a guy who was extremely productive in college at NC State, went on to have a productive 5-year stint with Denver, played under Ejiro Evero for half a season, got traded to Miami when it was very clear that the Broncos were bottoming out and going to have a new regime. He had an up and down career in Miami. He missed all of the 2024 season with an ACL injury, but in between that, or sandwiched outside of that, the bread of his tenure, he had an 11.5 sack season, and then he had an 8.5 sack season last year. The injury history is kind of troublesome. He's going to turn 30 later this off season, I believe. So it's kind of one of those things where it's like he's kind of against type from an injury standpoint and maybe even an age standpoint, but he's been pretty productive as a pass rusher. The one thing I will say is if the Panthers weren't interested in Harold Landry, who had a terrific season with the Patriots this past year, I don't know if they're necessarily going to be interested in a similar type player in Bradley Chubb, who has an injury history, who is about to turn 30. It'll be interesting to see how his market develops. And I would imagine he has a decent market because there are so many teams with heavy cap space allotments. You know, I think as of Tuesday, there were 11 teams over the cap. But for the most part, everybody is about 10 million and up under the cap. And I think that benefits his market and the negotiations. That said, there's a lot of mid-tier pass rushers about to hit the market. There are a few top-tier pass rushers, depending on how you feel about Trey Hendrickson coming off of injury and his age. You know, there are some other guys that are up there as well, but they might be franchise tagged or get extensions before the open market opens.
Yeah. And that is all very fair. But if I'm a Panthers follower, like an ardent follower, I look at that pressure rate in 2025, 31st in the league. The only team that was worse than their pressure rate was the New York Jets. I see, like you mentioned, the Evero connection. And I also see, like we talked about this with Trey Hendrickson a lot, like a lot of these pass rushers who have these really gaudy numbers don't perform well in a 3-4 scheme. It would be hard to imagine them doing so. And I think Bradley Chubb would be able to, or at least he's proven that he's been able to. So I don't know. That's at least compelling from that perspective to me.
Yeah. I mean, I think if I'm him, unless I'm signing a 1-year deal to kind of prove it again that I can make it through another season and I want to go to a scheme that benefits me, I'm waiting till the market opens because by then every team will be under the salary cap. They'll be able to plan through their cuts and everything like that. They won't be forcing a move. And if you're Bradley Chubb, you probably want to play for a team that's contending. You want to play for a team where you have good rush partners. I think that's part of the Panthers' issue with creating sacks as well as their appeal, right? Right now, the guys who can create pressure are Derek Brown, Turk Warden when he's used effectively, Nick Scorton, and to some extent Princely Umanmielen. You look at what we saw from Seattle, and we talked about it a lot on the podcast last week. They have so many different fireballs to throw at opposing quarterbacks. So you're all winning together. You're forging chemistry, but you also have talent spread out, right? It's like in baseball, when a superstar player is hitting third, you want to make sure he has protection with that cleanup hitter, right? Mm-hmm. You want to make sure that the opposing pitcher is afraid to walk the number 3 guy because the number 4 guy can smash some stuff over the fence. And so I think that's what the Panthers need to be able to do. They need to be able to double dip this offseason, draft a pass rusher high, first 3 rounds, who they can develop long-term with Scorton, but then they also need to bring in a guy who is at least mid-tier. I brought up Joseph Osai from the Bengals multiple times in the newsletter and on here, or somebody of that ilk, so you can throw a bunch of fastballs. I don't think this is simply a one-and-done type of change where you go, hey, let's go after Trey Hendrickson and see if he can fit a 3-4 defense, even at his age and all that stuff. I think you need as many fireballs as you can. And I think for the most part, if you're spending on Bradley Chubb, depending on what he wants, that may lead you to be a little bit more lenient on when you draft a pass rusher. So I don't know how much that fits in the plan. I don't know how much Evero, thought he fit what he wanted to do, but he did have similar success in a Vic Fangio scheme in Miami. So, and they're very comparable. So I think it'll be interesting to see how they look at this. But I also really thought that Harold Landry was a guy who was in a similar situation last year, who I thought they desperately should have gone after, and they weren't interested. He ended up signing with the Patriots.
Yeah, that's really good stuff. I'm glad that you brought up your newsletter because That's some really good appointment reading. Not to just be a self plug, but it's really a self important appointment reading for you, Mike, because this is a fun time where you can like make predictions on what the Panthers are going to do and what they will. And oftentimes you are correct both on the player side and also on the coaching side. One thing that you're correct on the coaching side, as I stumble through this segue, you predicted that the Panthers were going to bring in longtime offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach Darrell Bevell, and they did. Bevell has joined Dave Canales and the Panthers coaching staff as the new associate head coach and offensive specialist. It's unclear exactly what he's going to be doing in that new role, but Bevell has extensive experience calling plays. He has immense experience. He's been in the NFL since 2000. He's worked with Canales before. He's been an interim head coach twice as well. Mike, why? Because you predicted this previously, why does this hire make so much sense to you?
Well, I think for one, after the San Francisco game, I had kind of a polarizing Kaye's take where I said I thought they needed to shake up the way this offense is facilitated and the ecosystem around Bryce Young. They had to compromise a little bit, and that's hard to do in the middle of the season, but they couldn't put their head in the sand even if this team made the playoffs. They ended up making the playoffs. They ended up being in a shootout with the Rams. Obviously, the week after the 49ers game, I believe, was when they had a really great, strong performance against an NFC West team. I think for the Panthers, this is a situation where they're maturing, right? They know what they are not good at, which is sequencing. I think that's abundantly clear. And I think having somebody like Bevell, who's been an offensive coordinator for 15 years, speaks the same language as Canales, comes from a similar tree with Pete Carroll, but also has expanded his horizons working for the last 4 years with Mike McDaniel, understanding that mid and outside zone Shanahan-style offense, the creativity, which is something that Canales covets. I think that that's beneficial, even if Canales were to stay put as the offensive play caller. Now, here's where it gets more interesting. Let's say that Canales wanted to lean into his strengths, which are leadership, culture, managing, and he wants to really manage this product overarching, right? He wants to be in more special teams meetings. He wants to be in more defensive meetings. Brad Issac leads a lot of offensive meetings. He's the one that is crafting a lot of these plays. You hand him the playbook, you hand him the play sheet, you hand him the microphone. If he's calling plays and Canales is worried about the big picture, then Bevell can be his sounding board. You have a guy who's done it before, a guy who's been successful in doing it before, and you have a guy who understands quarterback play. And I think that would benefit Idzik not only on the sideline, but entering games, entering play calling responsibilities, what have you. I think there's a similar language there, which would also take the burden off of Canales' plate. I'm somebody who does respect the CEO coach outlook. I've seen it work before. I've seen guys give up play calling and then soar. As you guys know, I covered the Eagles. I remember the day that Nick Sirianni gave up play calling to Shane Steichen. And since then, I know it's looked like chaos from the outside, but they've been to 2 Super Bowls. He's won a Super Bowl. I think he's 6th or 7th all time in winning percentage. It can be beneficial. There are guys that really benefit from being that CEO coach. And if Brad Issac does well, you're probably doing well. And if you lose him to a head coaching job in the next couple of years, great. Well, you've probably gotten a couple of 10-win seasons, and then, he can just toss the rock to Darrell Bevell, who's probably not going to be inching for an offensive coordinator job. Now, this is all hypothetical, obviously, but to me, this shows you that, one, I saw some stupid graphic on social media that Canales is one of the 10 guys on the hot seat entering the season. I think, if anything, this hire shows you he is very comfortable in his position. They are allowing him to invest in other coaches. And I think this opportunity allows you to kind of reconfigure the way you're calling offense, the way you are constructing offense, and the way you're handling Bryce Young in an all-important fourth year for him and third year for Canales and Isaac. I don't think it's a slam dunk, but I think it's the most logical move they could make.
Yeah. So are you advising the Panthers right now? Because it's really sound advice if so, or is this like a full blown prediction? Is it if everything goes how you expect it to go? Do you think Brad Isaac is going to be calling plays next year?
I think the tea leaves are there.
Okay.
This is not a report. This is just my reporter sense. I feel like you don't make this Bevell hire unless you're going to do something to at least shake things up. Now, that could mean that Canales is continuing to call plays, but he puts Bevell and Isaac in charge of crafting them together. I think the issue that they've had with sequencing is you look at, like, Dave's not taking stuff from start to finish, right? Brad's got such a heavy hand in how they're calculating this offense and putting it together and crafting these plays and these game plans, because Canales has to worry about the big picture, right? And so then on top of that, he's also working with Bryce. Like, he's doing a lot of things. And so you're taking that and then you're taking it on game day. And it's like me putting that was last week. A Cheesecake Factory menu in front of you and having you call out the ingredients on each play, right? Like, like Cheesecake Factory, my wife and I have this long-standing joke where when we go there, we flip through the entire menu at least once because there's like 150 things on there. I haven't been there in a couple of years, but I'm sure it's still like that. I just think there needs to be some sort of change. And I don't know what the answer is. I've said that on here multiple times. They're paid to make that decision. And I just think the plays in like a vacuum are working. Guys are getting open. There's some creative stuff there. I think the play calling sequencing is the problem. So if you can find out a way to streamline that, whether that means that Bevell becomes the guy in Canales' ear when he's play calling, or he hands over play calling in general, I think that there's some logic to that. And I think it would say a lot about Dave Canales if he were to hand over play calling. But we won't know that until we talk to him. And I think the next time he's available is at the Combine. So it'll be interesting to see what he has to say about the Bevell hire and where he functions in all this, because an associate head coach can have a lot of different responsibilities. It's just like a matter of what you do for the team.
We bring up like these mediocre chain restaurants more than any other podcast, I think, on planet Earth. Between Outback Steakhouse, between Applebee's, bro, we were texting about a Bahama Breeze earlier this week because I
didn't know that Bahama Breeze was still open until you said something. And you're like, is this like a thing? And I'm like, yeah, they were really popular in the 90s, early 2000s.
Well, you've just been to like you've lived in the weirdest parts of the United States. And I was just like, okay, well, I mean, not that Florida in total is weird, but
no, Florida in general is a weird place. That's a fair.
But I was just like, oh, Bahama Breeze, is this like a Florida thing? And you're like, no, dude, like it's a big deal. But anyway, we talked about it a lot. Okay.
It was.
And then you made this, then you talked about Cheesecake Factory, which I probably shouldn't call Cheesecake Factory mediocre, but whatever.
Yeah.
Before we lose the plot.
We are never getting sponsors for this show. Never. But I will say Bahama Breeze and Cheesecake Factory were huge during J.J. Jansen's first 5 years in the league, if you want a good time of reference.
Wow. I love how we can bring everything back. You mentioned the NFL Combine, the NFL Scouting Combine, and how that's probably the next time Dave Canales is going to be available. That is the next time we as reporters ultimately get to ask and answer and have our questions answered ahead of the 2026 season. It's a time when we get to talk to prospects for like that the Panthers might draft or what have you. And so I was hoping that we could talk about our biggest questions going into the NFL Scouting Combine. I'll go first, and mine will be very simple because it's probably the most obvious one that listeners have. The Panthers are currently, and at least they should be, on a quest to find the next great inside linebacker. If you look at the two golden eras of the Carolina Panthers, in 2002 to 2003 to 2004, whatever, Dan Morgan, now the team's general manager, was that guy. He, for a moment, was getting looks as being Defensive Player of the Year those years when they were really, really good on defense. That was their identity, and it ran through Dan Morgan, who was also the play caller. The next time the Panthers were really, really good was in 2015. And yes, Cam Newton took up so much cultural space when you think about that team. It certainly did to me growing up in North Carolina. But that defense was crazy sound, and it's because of Pro Football Hall of Famer Luke Kuechly being there.
And Thomas Davis.
Sure, and Thomas Davis. That's a good point. Another great inside linebacker. Two amazing. The Panthers need to find one. I think that they were building something previously before the Josie Jewell injury really changed their defensive plan last year. Obviously, Josie Jewell was suffering from concussion-like symptoms months after he suffered a concussion at the end of 2024. The team ultimately released him ahead of 2025, giving the reins ultimately to Trevin Wallace and Christian Roseboom, who in moments flashed, but Trevin Wallace suffered from injury. Christian Roseboom had an up and down year, although he did have a really good year against the run toward the end of the season specifically. I think this is the year that if the Panthers are going to pull the trigger on getting someone in the first round, that they might focus on the inside linebacker spot. We don't know a ton we know a lot about who these inside linebacker prospects are. Of course, we always think that we always have a plan going into how they're going to stack out on up until draft night and really a couple weeks before that, and then everything changes. The Panthers, a lot of people in the Panthers media corps thought that they were going to take Jalen Walker last year, and he had a wonderful rookie year for the Atlanta Falcons. But of course, he played on the edge for the Falcons, and his versatility was a strength, blah, blah, blah. We can talk about Arvell Reese out of Ohio State or Sonny Styles out of Ohio State. We can talk about David Bailey out of Texas Tech, who also has capabilities to play on the outside as well. We can talk about Anthony Hill Jr. out of Texas if you want. But we won't really know how that all stacks out until the teams talk to him, until they perform in their various drills at the NFL Scouting Combine. But that is the question that I'm going into the Combine with. Can the Panthers find their next great linebacker? Because they are so much closer to this team being a good, solid playoff team, a reliable playoff team. I think that is probably their most actionable place on the defensive front. Shore up that place. And I think it starts in the NFL Combine in a couple weeks. Mike, what do you think about all that?
I think to your point, I think they've won in positions on the margins. So they have set the top of market pricing on non-premium positions in each of the last 2 years for just a moment, right? They signed Robert Hunt to a $100 million deal. Guard is not considered a premium position, but they got better at a position that is overlooked by a lot of teams. They were able to get the best talent at that position and make themselves better, and then draft guys who are at premium positions. They then did that with Trevon Merrick, safety, another position that is not considered premium by most teams. So I think if you look at what they could do this year, inside linebacker free agency wise is very actionable. I think Devin Lloyd makes a lot of sense. Devin Bush is on the smaller side, but he had a great bounce back year last year. Nakobe Dean, who's also a little bit smaller, had a really good bounce back year after a major knee injury. There are going to be guys out there that you can add and then make the face of your defense in a lot of ways. They have a pillar up front with Derek Brown. They have they have two pillars in the secondary in J.C. Horn and Trevon Merrick. And I think what they're really missing is inside linebacker and outside linebacker help. The hope is that Nick Scorton's one of those pillars, and then you add another guy. But I agree with you completely. It would not shock me if they double dipped at that position, frankly. And then my question, we just kind of talked about, what's the future of the offense under Dave Canales? Is it a
Right.
change in play calling? Is it a change in responsibilities? How does Darrell Bevell impact Brad Isaac's responsibilities? What's going on there? Because my spidey senses immediately went up. And, Bevell was in the conversation for the Jets offensive coordinator job, ironically. Previous Panthers head coach Frank Reich got that gig, but to me, Bevell is a guy who's got a lot of experience. He knows how to call plays in the NFL, and he's one of the biggest influences on Canales' career. So I'm intrigued by this change. When I suggested it in the newsletter, it was more so for him to be a sounding board. But given how much Bevell has attracted attention for an offensive coordinator job and his title, I'm intrigued by what his responsibilities will be and how they in turn impact the head coach's responsibilities and the offensive coordinator responsibilities.
Yeah. A lot of really interesting stuff that we will unearth in a couple weeks at the NFL Scouting Combine. Mike, just really, really quick. You made a fascinating point about how the Panthers have set the market on the margins for at positions that aren't considered premium positions. They also did that in the draft this past year, I would like to think. I want to go through really quick these day three, a couple, our day three picks that really shined in 2025 and who the Panthers will probably steer away from drafting in 2026. For me, it's a non-premium position, like you mentioned. Lathan Ransom was a day three pick last year who was just so impressive in many ways. 51 tackles, 1 sack, 1 forced fumble, 1 interception. That 1 interception came in it ultimately yielded the most important play of his career to date. It was also one of the most important plays of the Panthers season when you kind of step back and look at it all, because it came on that final drive against the Tampa Bay Bucks, the Panthers' final win that ultimately gave them a path to the playoffs, their first playoff berth since 2017, blah, 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 all these things that we've already said. That's really important. And I think if Dan Morgan can put together another draft that finds someone like a Lathan Ransom somewhere that really makes hay in day three. Yes, they made a lot of hay in drafting Tetairoa McMillan in that first round, and he was Offensive Rookie of the Year, and that was great. But finding these players late in rounds that can make immediate impacts is going to be really important. Mike, was there an NFL day three guy that really impressed you?
Yeah, I'm interested to see more of really both fifth round picks in Mitchell Evans and Cam Jackson. I think those two guys can bring something to the fold. Nose tackle and tight end are obviously, like you said, non-premium positions. But I think with how they're going to have to rework the rotation in the trenches, with Wharton playing more of a 3 technique and focusing solely on that, and then Bobby Brown needing a tag team partner at the nose tackle position in the rotation, I think that benefits them. I think they will draft another 3 technique. We obviously have talked about A'Shawn Robinson having a pretty cuttable contract. It would open up around $10 million. They certainly could use that money, even though I don't know that I agree with letting him go just for nothing.
Yeah.
I was pretty impressed with A'Shawn's first 2 years on his 3-year contract. And then Mitchell Evans is really interesting because to me, he probably has the most two-way upside of any tight end on the roster. Tommy Tremble's obviously right now the number 1 tight end. They can cut him and save $6 million. But what's interesting about that is his contract doesn't become guaranteed until 2 days after free agency starts. So they could technically negotiate with his replacement on March 9th, sign him on March 11th, and then move on from Tommy. So they're in a really good, favorable position to figure out if they want to upgrade over Tommy Tremble. I'm under the impression he'll be back, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
Jatavian Sanders has improved as a blocker, but I think he's more so your big wide receiver tight end. Mitchell Evans has shown blocking prowess and upside as a receiver. I'm interested to see what he does in year 2 and if he can take the next step in his growth. I thought day 3 worked out really well for the Panthers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely did. All right, Mike, let us get out of here. Anything else you want to mention before we get out of here?
Yeah, we will both be at the NFL Scouting Combine next week for a week of interviews and prospect features and all that stuff. We'll also have a podcast next Wednesday live from Indianapolis. Should be great. Subscribe to our newsletter, Access Panthers. It's Alex's turn to write one up, and then I will do the following one after the Combine. It's going to be a fun week of information, and hopefully some interesting stuff comes out of it with our takes and with our analysis and interviews and video and all that sort of stuff. So just stick to the Charlotte Observer and enjoy it. Also, Tuesday, I published a story on the director of college scouting, Jared Kirksey, who's been rising up the ranks in Carolina and other places. He's got an integral part of the draft process. I shadowed him in Frisco, Texas during the Shrine Bowl, had a couple of sit downs with him. I think the story is something that diehards and casual fans can enjoy. So check that out on the charlotteobserver.com.
Absolutely. All right, then. Thanks to our sponsors, Bahama Breeze. Kidding. Thanks, as always, for listening to our pontifications on all things Panthers with Mike Kaye and myself and our wonderful producer, Zach Dennis. Please subscribe and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts by searching Processing Blue. And if you watch us on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to get notified whenever new episodes drop. And finally, please be sure to stick to charlotteobserver.com for all of your Panthers needs. Mike, stay humble, stay creative, and keep processing.
That's a wrap.